Saraswati Devi Gauravani Prachaline Nivishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine.
Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Prachaline Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine.
Shiva Sadi Gaur Bhaktivedanta.
Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktivedanta.
Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktivedanta.
Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktivedanta.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Śrīla Prabhupada.
Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Prabhupada.
Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada.
Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada.
Srila Prabhupada ki, Samaveta Bhaktivedanta ki, Jai Nitai Gaur Premanande. Just kind of go to my room and get a book. I'd like to bring it in. Just take me a second. Might be good. Is everyone okay sitting on the floor? You comfortable sitting on the floor?
Yes.
I wouldn't be able to do it. All right, so been asked to talk a bit about deity worship and a few different topics. I was thinking of discussing is one is cleanliness, which, as you're probably aware, Prabhupada emphasized cleanliness and punctuality as the two most important aspects of deity worship. And then also a little bit about standards of worship, mood of worship, and then also a bit of a comparison or contrast between home worship and temple worship. And let's see how we go with that. There's kind of a lot to achieve in 2 hours, because as you know, you can get sort of, when you start getting into the details of different things, there are lots of information there. So, as I mentioned, Srila Prabhupada, he spoke a lot about deity worship. And the two things he emphasized above all else is cleanliness and punctuality. He always said cleanliness first. And as you know, in Vedic texts there's a rule of order, so usually the thing that's said first is the most important. And so he would generally say cleanliness first. And just a bit of a disclaimer, what I talk about is just like general principles of worship, but when you go to different temples you'll see that they implement the standards in different ways. So like, you come here and do worship here in Melbourne Temple, it's done in one way. You go to the Sydney Temple, you see it's a bit different, The principles are the same, but there's difference in the details, and you'll find that every temple you go. There's a really nice purport in the 8th chapter of the 4th canto, where Narada Muni is instructing Dhruva Maharaj in deity worship. And he said, in that verse he says that the deity worship, however, must be done in regard to time, place, available conveniences, and inconvenience. So and he goes on to explain in the purport that what is practical in one place may not be practical in another place. So, whenever you do deity worship, wherever you do deity worship, always keep that in mind, that, okay, I learned it here to do it in one way, but in another temple I may not do it exactly like that. So just be mindful that, it's not going to be the same everywhere. Because, even you look at it from Krishna's perspective, it would be pretty boring if everywhere he was he got the same worship. So, there's a lot of flavour in the worship. And you'll see, you go to different temples, for instance, like Bhaktivedanta Manor, they're famous for one thing. Well, they're famous for many things, one thing in particular.
Sundays.
Huh?
Sundays.
Milk sweets, yeah, they've got just the most amazing milk sweets. And other temples that you go to Mumbai, the Raj Bhog is very, very good. In Melbourne Temple, beautiful altars, so many things here that you'll find they're unique to Melbourne. Prabhupada personally installed the DDC, installed Gauri-Taya, installed Radha Balba, so each place has its uniqueness. And it's certainly not the endeavour of the ministry, the deity ministry, is to make it the same everywhere. I remember when I first took on this service, a senior devotee said to me, he said, "Oh great, now you can go and make the standard of worship the same everywhere in the world." And I just thought, oh, that wouldn't be nice to do that. Because there's variety, there's unlimited variety in service to Krishna, so it's not the intention to make it the same everywhere. Now, as I mentioned, Prabhupada, he emphasized a lot cleanliness. And there's a really interesting quote, or letter that Prabhupada wrote to, I can't remember if it was Shalabhati or Rukmini, and he wrote to one of those devotees. Shalabhati was like the Adi Pujari. She was basically the first serious Pujari in ISKCON. And in this letter, Prabhupada was talking about cleanliness standards, and then at the end of the letter he said, the idea is summit cleanliness, that will satisfy Krishna. So like when you're on the summit of the mountain, you're on the top of the mountain, it means you can't go any higher. So it means when just like we see this Archman cup here, sparkling clean. This is actually the natural colour of copper. So you can't get it any cleaner. So then this is actually clean. One time Prabhupada was staying in Vrindavan, and it was at the time of year when they have the dust storms. And Jamuna was cleaning his room. And Jamuna was, I don't know if you ever met Jamuna, she was a very fastidious person. She wanted to make sure that everything that was done perfectly. And so she would, when Prabhupada went out on his morning walk, she would busy herself cleaning Prabhupada's room, and she'd clean the desk, she'd clean the floors, clean everything. And then she'd even wipe all the pens down individually. Jamuna, when will you ever learn? And Jamuna's, what do you mean Swamiji? Because it was back when they called him Swamiji. And she said, when will you ever learn? He said, I don't know what you mean. And Prabhupada said, when will you ever learn to clean? And Jamuna was thinking that everything was perfectly spotless. And she was a little bit sort of flabbergasted. And she says, what do you mean, Swamiji? And so Prabhupada, he opened the stapler that was on the desk and he wiped his finger inside and said, see, dust. There was a little bit of dust inside the stapler. That was the type of cleanliness that Prabhupada wanted in ISKCON. And he said, the temple room should be shiny like a new pin. Everything should be shiny like a new pin. Everything, in the temple, in our homes, everything. We need to keep everything spotlessly clean. It's a very, very important part of spiritual cultivation. Is it okay if I put this book on here? Ginger Maji, put this book here?
Yeah, okay, sorry.
Spiritual.
Prabhupada sat there.
Yeah, spiritual book.
Yeah, it's okay.
I'll read you some interesting references from, I just don't want to put it on the floor. From, this is a document that we've put together references or quotes from Srila Prabhupada. So this is from Bhagavad Gita. And then in Bhagavad Gita, in the 13th chapter, verses 8 to 12, these verses 8 to 12, Krishna is describing the qualities of a devotee. And then in the purport, Srila Prabhupada says, cleanliness is essential for making advancement in spiritual life. There are two kinds of cleanliness, external and internal. External cleanliness means taking a bath, but for internal cleanliness, one has to think of Krishna always and chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. This process cleans the accumulated dust of past karma from the mind. So we see here, Prabhupada's making several very important points. One of the first points he's saying is cleanliness is essential for spiritual advancement. And he talks about external and internal cleanliness. But when he talks about external cleanliness, he gives a very simplified version of it, that, it means taking a bath. But there's actually a lot more to it than that, and that's what I wanted to discuss a little bit here. There's this book here. It's been out of print for a few years. We're working on the next version of it. And this is called Pancharatradeep, which means illumination on Pancharatra. But technically speaking, this book is not an illumination on Pancharatra. It's a deity worship book, or an Archana Padati. So we're changing the name of it to Method of Worship for the International Society of Krishna Consciousness, which is what it is. And there's a few quotes from here. Deity worship means to be very, very clean. You should try to bathe twice daily. So even Prabhupada was being, somewhat lenient there, because generally a Brahmin should bathe how many times? 3 times a day. When?
Before the Sunday.
On the Sunday, yeah, because when we chant our Gayatri mantras, like the Sandhya Vandana, strictly speaking, you should bathe before you chant the Sandhya Vandana. So by cleansing the self, especially cleansing with water, it helps the mind to become peaceful. Like when you wake up in the morning, you feel a bit groggy from sleep and all that sort of stuff, and you go and have a bath. Even you can clean your teeth and do things like that, but until you bathe yourself, you don't feel really cleansed or refreshed, or it helps to clear the mind. And I mentioned in the Bhagavatam class this morning that Narada Muni, after his mother had passed away and he left the Mahabhagavatas and went travelling to the north, he'd been travelling for some time, he was feeling very tired, fatigued, and then he bathed, and immediately he felt refreshed. So water has quite a prominent effect. It really affects our consciousness. So this is helps the mind become peaceful, helps the mind become clear. And so when we bathe, before doing spiritual activities, it really helps us to focus on those spiritual activities. And then even if we can't bathe, if for some reason we can't bathe, then at least do archana. This is also a means of cleansing, because it's infusing water, which is it's sipping water, taking water into the body, which has been infused with mantra, so the water becomes transcendental. And then Prabhupada goes on, deity should never be approached without having bathed first and changed to clean clothes after passing stool, etc. So again, Prabhupada is just giving a quick synopsis. So the etc. means, okay, you've got passing stool, he identifies there, eating. If you're eating, the clothes are unclean. If you pass water in the clothes are unclean. If you go outside the temple in the clothes. Of course, if you're living nearby and you just walk from home to the temple, you'll find in most temples that's acceptable. Some temples say, no, you have to put on fresh clothes. I think in Hungary they have that standard, but then they have facilities there for the acharyas to change. Most temples don't have those facilities because it's just a little bit too like in a city temple, you don't have a lot of room. You don't have acres and acres of land. Also, when you come into contact with lower living entities such as animals, I think you need to change clothes. If you see a dead body, you shouldn't really bathe after that. But of course, in the city, it's not uncommon to come across dead bodies. There's many different detailed rules about when you need to bathe and when you need to put on fresh clothes. But essentially, and also the clothing needs to be things like, what are the fabrics we can use in deity worship or cooking for the deities? Cotton. Cotton's considered pure. Silk. Yeah. What else? Wool and jute. These are the three pure fabrics. Now you find with a lot of clothes these days, saris, dhotis, those dhotis with the South Indian dhotis with a big border, those borders are synthetic. So better you can avoid wearing those. Also you'll see with a lot of the saris these days, they have synthetic borders on them. And one way you can tell it is after the first few times you wash it, you see how the border gets rippled? That's the different shrinkage rate. So they're usually synthetic. So better if you can just wear pure cloth. Often you find with the Bengali saris, they're just very simple cotton saris. They just dye them. But of course the dye in the Bengali saris is not so good. It usually runs into all the other colours. So yeah, pure fabrics recommended for worship. Some people say that wool is not recommended for worship, but then Sanatana Swami in the Hare Bhaktivedanta explains that wool is the best type of fabric for all types of pujas. So he makes it very clear that it's the best. But then try to get a non-shedding variety of wool. Like this is wool, and if you see it doesn't pill. It's very fine wool. So if you get very fine wool, that's better. Better not to wear coarse wool. And like here, because in the winter time it does get quite cold, it just seems to be practical to be wearing, at least one chadar, wool chadar. Like what you can do is, especially if you're in an environment where it's windy, if you get a silk chadar and a wool chadar, you put them on together, you'll find that this helps you to keep warm. It also keeps the wind out because silk blocks the wind better than cotton or wool. But you can do things like that. And Tamal Krishna Maharaj told me that if you put two chadars together and then put them on as one, that has the warming effect of three chadars. And it's much warmer like that, so it's quite effective. And then Prabhupada also, he talks about cleaning, change to clean clothes and bathing after passing stool. Also things like cutting your fingernails, brushing your teeth. What else? Going, as I mentioned, going outside, coming into contact with someone clean. Also, if you come into contact with, say for instance, those of us who, of course, you're not going to go around and ask every lady, oh, are you experiencing your menses right now? But if you're married at home and your wife is experiencing menses, it's maybe at those times it's better to take care of your own laundry and stuff because generally their bodies are quite contaminated at that time. But these things, I don't really kind of get into it too much, and I think really what you have to do is the individual couples need to sort these things out. And also consult with temple authorities to see what standards they follow. I know, for instance, like in Vrindavan, when the ladies experience their menses, they're not allowed to make garlands, ski weeks, anything like that. The same here? Yeah. Whereas other temples, you find they don't have those standards. A lot of times it is driven by what they call practicalities. I'm not saying I agree with this or not, but I'm just explaining what they do. Because they just don't have the devotees to do the service otherwise. So sometimes those kind of practical adjustments need to be made. Not ideal, but time, place and circumstance, as Nara really points out. Then what other things? When you cut your hair, when you shave your face, anything like that, you need to bathe. Hair is considered to be very contaminating. That's one of the reasons why you find brahmacharis separately shave the head because it's considered to be clean. And if hair gets into the offerings, I was actually somewhere the other day and I was eating Mahaprasad and pulled out this big long hair. This is not a very good thing. And that's why it's really important that if you are cooking, okay, it said the lady should cover the hair, But if the men have got hair, they should cover their hair also. Shaved heads, but of course if you're working, it's a bit hard, to go to work with a shaved head in a secret. You might get a lot of unwanted attention. And so, but if you do have hair and you are doing service in the kitchen, then you need to have some kind of hair covering, just to avoid hair falling into the deity's offering. And it's kind of interesting, like when this the pandemic started in 2019, ministry put together a few documents, guidelines for devotees, how to stay safe, how to continue with deity worship during the pandemic. And the main focus I put into this document was cleanliness, because I read a few scientific papers and they're saying one of the best ways to kill the virus was washing your hands with soapy water, because the virus, the body of the virus, or whatever they call it, is made of lipids. Soap is also made of lipids, so when you wash your hands with soap, you cause the body of the virus to disintegrate. And so it's, and sorry, it's not made of lipids, it's made of fat, and the lipids in soap cause the fat to dissolve. So, and it's kind of, some temples I know, they actually stopped doing archment because they were worried the water in the archment cup would become contaminated. When I learned in deity worship in Mayapur, you wash the archment cup every time before you use it, put fresh water in the archment cup. Because you figure, like, the archment cup, maybe it's changed in the morning, when they're setting up. Then you come there midday, that water's been sitting there for 6 hours, or more, 8 hours. How much dust and other things are sitting in the water? The water becomes impure. And you can see, like, sometimes you can see when the light hits water that's been sitting there for some time, you can see, contaminant on the surface of the water. So this is the nature of Brahmana, is able to identify things that are impure and also to keep very, very clean. And sometimes it may seem fanatical or a little bit, excessive detail, but one place Prabhupada said is detail is a sign of love. So we're doing the detail not to become like obsessive about all these little rules and regulations, but we're doing the detail for the pleasure of Krishna. Prabhupada explains, he says, Krishna is the supreme pure, and if you want to approach the supreme pure, you must also become pure. So if we don't pay attention to these details of purity, then how are we going to become pure? It's a very, very important point. And this is why I mentioned in class this morning that purity and cleanliness is such an important part of Vedic culture, and the whole culture is focused on, understanding, not just imbibing, but actually, following the practices of purity. And you'll see in the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam, Krishna explains to Uddhava how to understand things that are pure and impure, and how to purify things. So there's a lot of description in the Bhagavatam. I just want to touch on a few points here in this chapter 1 of this book. So it talks about morning duties, and this is following from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's instructions to Sanatana Goswami, which are recorded in the 24th chapter of the Madhya Lila. And so the first thing it talks about is morning duties and remembrance of the Lord. So when we wake up, the first thing we do is remember Krishna. And this helps to purify the consciousness, even before you get out of bed, And it's like sometimes when you, I know for me, it's like, sometimes when when I'm sleeping, some of the dreams I have are just like really unpleasant dreams, And so, but this is all just, it's dreams, it's not like real. But the consciousness becomes polluted by that. So the first thing we do when we wake up in the morning is Hare Krishna, pay obeisance to the Guru. So immediately we're sort of bringing our consciousness back to reality. And then, so usually it's recommended to rise early in the morning. And Prabhupada would often mention, having 6 hours of sleep. But, I guess it's different for different people. Some people need more sleep. I found that for myself, I can't do it with 6. I need 6.5 or 7 minimum. And if I go less than that, then I find that I wind up having to sleep during the day. So which is, to me, it's counterproductive. And also we see now, because it mentions here about the time of rising from bed, ideally you rise during the Brahma Muhurta. But since global travel has stopped, I'm finding that most of the interactions I have now are on the internet, and you wind up having meetings that are finishing at midnight and things like that, so pretty hard to get up early in the morning in this day. Yeah, so but it's important to rise early. And then Prabhupada actually in some places said, those who can't rise early aren't serious about spiritual life. It's a very important point to rise early. And it's also, the morning hours, especially during the Brahma Muhurta, which is approximately 1.5 hours before sunrise, these are the best times for spiritual activities. Then offering a bait, as I said, offering. Then the next one in the Bhagavatam is Mala Mucha, Chag, and Socha, and also Danta Davana. So Mala means like impurities. There's different types of impurities that come from the body, such as impurities from the eyes. You get these, sleep, we used to call it as a kid. I don't know the technical name for it. Things that come out of the ears, things that come out of the nose, things that come out of the mouth, and also other parts of the body. So this is called mala, or impurities. And when we wake up in the morning, we evacuate, we remove all these impurities from the body, but then you have to cleanse the orifices, the eyes or whatever like that, the mouth. So we usually do it by brushing the teeth and rinsing our backside, etc. And then socha means to purify yourself after evacuating, etc. And then Prabhupada, there's a quote here from the Madhya Lila. Pratyakritya means that when a devotee should evacuate regularly, means that a devotee should evacuate regularly and then cleanse himself by taking bath. One has to gargle, archman, and brush his teeth, danta davana. He should do this either with twigs or a toothbrush, whatever is available. You notice Prabhupada, very practical, always very practical. He said whatever is available. Like he preferred to use a stick, but I mean, it's not like you can go to Coles and get neem twigs or eucalyptus twigs like that. So he would just encourage whatever is available. He said this will purify the mouth, then the devotee should take his bath. So we see that the Mahaprabhu is describing to Sanatana Swami the kinds of things he should describe, and that we need to understand purity and how to become pure. Then talks about the tuft of hair, how this is, I mean, again, practicalities. It's not everyone, especially those who are working. Not always you can have a seeker. And then taking bath, it talks about the different types of bath and all the different places to take bath, and the different types of water that you can use to take bath. Just like we see in the purport this morning, it was talking about bathing in the Ganga or the Jamuna. If you don't have the Ganga and Jamuna, the sea. And I noticed here, because I've been going for regular walks here, and always used to walk along here when we lived here. But there's an old lady who swims there every day. But not everyone's going to do that. In the middle of winter, it's like it can be quite challenging. But it's very good for health. And swimming in large bodies of water, they say it's good for the mind. Swimming in rivers is good for the veins and nerves and things like that. But it's an element of tapasya, but it's also very purifying. Now here we see it lists in order of purity the different types of water. So it talks about first off a sacred river, and then if you don't have access to a sacred river, then a tributary of a sacred river, or a river that flows into a tributary, and then it talks about pukko, like bathing in a pond, water from a well, and it just goes down the list. But we don't have any of those. We just got the shower, and so you just whatever's practical, according to time, place, available conveniences, inconveniences. But the main thing is to bathe, and the scriptures describe the benefits of taking a early morning bath, a cold bath. And it's very purifying, can wash away the power of external and internal contaminations. Warm water bath cleanses physically. A cold water bath revitalizes the subtle body, removing the influence of sleep and dreams, as well as of evil-minded persons. The cold bath gives strength, sensitivity, longevity, effulgence, and purity. Taking an early morning cold bath increases one's knowledge and determination, and affords peace of mind. It removes unhappiness, lamentation, degradation, and bad thoughts. In short, it counteracts all the ill effects of sin. And of course, if you're of such a disposition that taking a cold bath in the morning would stop you from getting up and having a bath, then take a warm bath. It's just practical. The main thing is to continue with service, because these things are material benefits, but doing devotional service has transcendental benefits. So, it's far greater than the benefit you're going to get from having a cold bath. If you can have a cold bath, very good. But if you can't, just have a warm bath. Then, it talks about the different types of bath, using earth, using water, using ashes from a sacrificial fire, contacting air. The Vayabhya Snan is I remember the first time I went to Vrindavan, we arrived there just as all the cows were coming back home, and all the dust was raised up by the hooves of the cows. A very, very auspicious time. And then you get covered in that dust that's raised by the hooves of the cows. It's called Vayabhya Snan. Very, very nice time. Then a Divya Snan. This is, what Divya Snan is? Bathing during a sun shower. When the sun's shining and it's raining at the same time? This is called Divya Snan. It's also very purifying. And then, of course, Mantra Snan is chanting appropriate verses while sprinkling oneself with water, and a Manashika Snan, meditating on Lord Vishnu. So the different types of snan, and then it goes into that, and then it talks about the benefits of different types of bathing, the rules for bathing, things like don't bathe naked, always wear some, generally you should have the lower body covered with cloth. Then don't take unnecessary baths. Usually 3 times a day is considered to be the maximum you would normally take baths, and then also after any occasion of impurity. But the thing is, like, if you bathe too much, you're actually going to have problems with your skin, because it washes all the oils out of the skin. There's oil in your skin for a particular purpose. They're meant to lubricate your skin and keep it in good condition. I have very dry skin, so I have to massage the body with oil, otherwise my skin just cracks up and it starts to bleed and all that sort of stuff. So by massaging with oil, it helps to maintain the body. So try not to have too many baths, whatever's necessary, but don't just bathe for the sake of bathing. And also, don't bathe in impure water. This can be a cause of disease also. You'll find oftentimes in these impoverished places where they don't have proper sanitation, that people often get diseases from coming to touch with, like drinking or bathing in impure water. So it's very. And then other rules they've got here is you have to evacuate. You do that before bathing, particularly when you're passing stool. Otherwise, it's compared to the elephant who has his bath and throws dirt all over his body. Then other minor rules, it's saying here, don't shake your hair to dry it, nor shake water from your cloth or your legs. My understanding of the reason why you do that is because if there's others bathing nearby, then your prasad water will come all over it. So better to avoid that. And then also, don't rub oil on your body after bathing. Oil has a particular function, and what you do is when you rub oil on the body before bathing, it helps to open up the pores of the skin. So then the body can discharge any kind of impurities. And also it helps to exfoliate as well, to remove dead skin from the body by rubbing oil, but you do that before you bathe. Then after bathing, dry your body with a clean cloth. Don't use the cloth you were sleeping in or anything like that, unless you've rinsed it out. But you should always dry yourself with a clean cloth. And then there's different things about alternate, Prabhupada says households and vanaprastha should bathe 2 times a day. And this is Pratham Madhyayana Snanam Vanaprastha Grihastayo. A sannyasi should bathe 3 times a day. A brahmachari may take only 1 bath a day. Whenever a person is not able to bathe in water, he can bathe by chanting the Hare Krishna mantra. So minimum usually is once a day. Then there's different times that are forbidden times of bathing. So during the 6 hours at night, if one will become unnecessarily chilled. After a meal, also it's forbidden to bathe after a meal because that will affect the digestion, and you can become unwell. Generally, you don't need to bathe directly after puja, yajnas, festivals, visits to tirthas, or other auspicious events, or after meeting with friends. For example, even if a person touches a chandala during a wedding or a festival or a yajna, or while near a temple, you do not have to bathe. And this rule is also there because generally, like when the pujaris, when they are coming to the temple, if they contact someone who's impure, and it says here a chandala, it could be so many different people, then you'd have to bathe. But during a festival, because there's different elements there. One is because it's very difficult, you know what it's like here, say for instance, Gorpani and Janmashtami, the place is just jam-packed and you can't move without coming into contact with other people. And also, because you're engaged in service of the festivals, it's very purifying. I don't know if you've ever had the experience, but after you engage in service for some extended period of time, you feel quite purified afterwards. So this is also purifying. And so the point that's being made here is you don't have to bathe after you're engaging in these spiritual activities. Same with taking prasad. It mentions here you don't bathe after taking prasad, and that's also because prasad is purifying. It's not contaminating. When you're eating, the act of eating and dropping, maybe potentially dropping small particles of food onto your lower clothes, then the clothes become contaminated. So you should change your clothes and rinse your mouth and wash your hands, all that sort of stuff. Then it talks about Vaishnava dress, then different types of dress and things you can and can't wear. Generally, like devotional minded. You see sometimes, it's not uncommon to see some of our congregational members wearing T-shirts, and they've got some slogan on them. You wonder, do they know what that means? I grew up in this culture. I know what that shirt's talking about. And sometimes you think they can't know what that means. They wouldn't wear it if they did. Because sometimes the slogans they have on them are pretty, degraded. So generally speaking, Vaishnavas, we don't wear T-shirts with material slogans on them or advertising some material product or something like that. And sometimes you'll see devotees will have T-shirts with prints of Mahavishnu on it or Radharani or something like that. But then how are you going to pay obeisance with Radharani on your chest? It's nice to have the picture in one sense, but I think the idea is so they can remember Radharani or whoever, but then or inspire others. But then you've got to pay obeisance in the temple and put the picture on the ground. So I never wear things like that. You usually just wear plain clothes, and also not trying to make any big statements. And then coloured cloth, traditionally Gaudiya Vaishnavas, Brahmacharis, Sannyasis, as well as Vanaprasthas not living with their wife would generally wear saffron coloured cloth. Grihastas and Vanaprasthas living there with their wife wear either white or yellow. This is tradition. Of course, you see these days it's become. I remember when I first joined, the Grihastas just wear white. There was no other colour. But now we see that some of our Grihasta devotees become a bit more stylish and wearing matching bead bag. They'll have like a dhoti with a certain colour border, and they'll have the bead bag and the curtain match the colour. A bit more stylish. I just wear white. It's easy. And then I don't have to think about what I'm wearing today. I've only got one set of clothes, one type of clothes that I have to think about it. So it talks about coloured cloth. It's common for uninitiated brahmacharis and unmarried bachelors to wear white, as the saffron colour is reserved for renunciates. You won't see that so widespread. In certain parts of India you'll see it. It's common in Mayapur. You'll see that the bhaktas are generally wearing white, but only initiated brahmacharis wear saffron. But it's not so widespread. It's just a tradition they follow there. It also mentions about wearing socks or stockings in the deity room. I know, for instance, that Srila Prabhupada told the devotees in Vrindavan that if it was too cold in the winter, they could wear woolen pullovers on the altar. Because the primary thing there is health. If someone's going to get sick because of cold weather, then better you wear clothing that's appropriate so that you maintain your health. Now, I know some of the ladies wear woolen saris, for instance. They're quite warm. Silk dhotis are also quite warm compared to like a cotton. And of course, again, going back to what I was saying at the start, I'm just giving general guidelines here, and it's like, don't rock up on the altar with a pair of socks on, for instance, if you haven't really cleared it with the temple authorities, because they may have a policy here where, no, we don't do that. So you just have to, work locally and see what works locally. Very, very important that we don't rock the boat. Because, we work cooperatively in devotional service, and we get things will work out much better. But it's not uncommon that devotees will wear, and if you are going to wear socks on the altar, then they need to be made of, or anything like that, any pullover, whatever. anything warmer, they also need to be made of pure fabric, such as wool, silk, jute, whatever. No synthetics. And synthetics also, not really smart to wear synthetics on the altar in the kitchen because they're flammable, highly flammable. Silk is also flammable. So you have to be mindful of that. If you're wearing silk, I wouldn't, if you can avoid wearing silk in the kitchen, because if it touches the flame, there's a good chance it's going to go up in flames. But especially don't wear synthetics in the kitchen. Really dangerous, because not only do they catch fire, but they become like napalm. They just stick to your body and burn. Very, very dangerous stuff. So avoid that. Then talk about marking the body with Vishnu tilak. Usually put tilak in 12 places: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We don't put tilak here. And you see a lot of devotees put tilak there. But the mantra we chant, it says tat prakshana toyam tu vasudevati murti. So what does prakshana mean? Washing the hands. So tat means that. Tat prakshana toyam. So the prakshana means to wash the hands. So it says toyam means water. Tu but. But so saying there's a change there, because all the other places saying you meditate while putting tilak. In these places you're meditating. What's the first line of the verse? Jayam Narayam. So it starts with Jayam. You're meditating while putting the. You don't have to say it. You just meditate on the form of the Lord when you're putting the Om Kesha Jayam Narayam. So when you put the tilak here, you meditate upon Kesha. And it says tat prakshana toyam tu. But so it's changing the order. It's changing what you're doing. When you after you wash your hands, the water that remains, toyam, the water that remains, you wipe that here and think of Vasudeva. So don't put tilak there, because what will happen is you go bald at the top there, because it will kill the hair follicles. But it's quite common to see devotees walking around with tilak on the top of their head, but the mantra is telling you not to do that. It's saying to put water there. So, but make sure when you wash your hand, there's not tilak in the water, because otherwise that will also, the tilak will get into the hair follicles. And especially if someone has weak hair, it's not so strong. You can see, like some devotees who, like maybe your experience in Mahamani, if you've got a receding hairline, if you take the tilak up past here, then what happens is your hair goes like this and it bumps around there and it goes like that, because the tilak kills the hair follicles. But it also mentions in scripture that the tilak goes up to the hairline. So the scripture's not going to tell us to do impractical things. It's very, very practical. And there's different things you can make tilak from, but usually we use clay that comes from the tree veining. Then lots of different glorifications of tilak, marking the body with Vishnu symbols. Sometimes you'll see people that have Mahamantra stamps, or they stamp things on their forehead and stuff like that. And then it gets into sipping water for purification. So as I was mentioning this morning, sipping water for purification, generally speaking, it gives a whole list of different times that one can sip water for purification. But usually we don't do it after occasions of bodily impurity. We do it before spiritual activities, such as chanting Gayatri, studying the scriptures, putting on tilak, performing deity worship, doing a puja or a yajna. What else? Did I say scriptures? Studying scriptures? Any chanting the holy name. You can do archman before these things, but generally we don't do it before any material activities. You can if you want to, or after material activities like going to the toilet and stuff. But generally it's done before any spiritual activity. And the water we use, have a nice clean archman cup. Not only the archman cup, but also the spoon needs to be cleaned. Often you'll see clean archman cups, but the spoon's not clean. So essentially what you're doing is you're putting pure water into a dirty spoon, mantra into the water, so the water becomes infused with the Lord's holy name, so then the water becomes transcendental. So when you sip the water, for a Brahmin actually it said that the water goes to the heart, the mantra goes to the heart, for a Vaishya to the lips and for a Kshatriya to the throat, but for a Brahmin it's supposed to go to the heart. And archman cups can be copper, brass, bell metal, silver, gold, anything like that. Copper's the best. It's actually, the scriptures have mentioned that copper is Krishna's favourite metal. And the best way to clean copper is usually with tamarind, and then just something abrasive. Traditionally they'd use mud, Ganga mud or Jamuna mud, but you probably don't have so much of that around here. So just anything mildly abrasive is also good. And then to talk about chanting Gayatri. Okay, any questions, comments, discussion so far? Yes, Prabhu.
Actually, the benefit of using tilak. What's the benefit of having the tilak?
Yeah, because this is called Urdhva Pundra, Urdhva Pundra tilak. And the idea is we're marking our body and at the same time remembering Vishnu's names. So I've heard different descriptions how when you put the different places we put the tilak are considered to be like auspicious places, and putting the tilak on those places has a metaphysical effect on the body and also the mind. But the main the different aspects is like when people see you, they think, oh, he's a devotee of Krishna. They know there's a Vaishnava. And also it helps us to identify as being a servant of Krishna. So this is for us is the main thing, is that others are reminded of Krishna, but we're also reminded of Krishna. And basically, Prabhupada sometimes will call it the flag. Basically I'm saying that this is Krishna's body, I'm Krishna's servant. So it's really good for the consciousness to do it.
The main challenge here in the Western world, even in India, we cannot show those kind of things in common place. Not very common. If you put tilak,
Oh, I worry.
you can be criticized by people.
My husband actually gives keynote lectures, international conferences. He put the tilak. I think, Prabhu, we should stop feeling self-conscious. Actually, people in my workplace as well, because work meetings, you don't have food. It's only, when they have food together. At first they used to think I'm odd, but now they respect you because they know that there is a principle behind why we do things. So I think it's our conscious. I think we should stop feeling self-conscious.
I remember when I was a bhakta here in Melbourne, I was doing service at Crossways. At that time, Crossways was at the top end of Elizabeth Street near Flinders Street, upstairs. And I was okay wearing a dhoti around the temple, and I was okay wearing a dhoti in there. But then one day Ushapati asked me to go to Woolworths, which was, where David Jones is now, backing onto, I think it's Little Collins Street. The stairs go down to there, so Woolworths used to be down there. So he asked me to go down to Woolworths to buy some yogurt, and I felt like, oh my God, I'm going to go outside like this, He said, what are you worried about? Someone's going to see you. I said, no one's going to worry about you, So I just went ahead and did it, and since that point I've never sort of thought about it once, I just don't think about it at all. And I actually find that traveling like this, I go everywhere dressed like this, it actually gives me a lot of opportunities to speak about Krishna. Because, like I was on the train somewhere and someone said to me, what's this about? Why are you dressed up like this? And so I was actually going to Brisbane. And so it gave me an opportunity to tell him about Krishna. And I told him about the temple. He could go because he wanted to read more about it. So we have a restaurant in George Street in Brisbane. You can go there and get some books, or you can go to our temple out in 70 Mile Rocks. And just so it gives you an opportunity. Same thing on planes. So I've got in the habit now. I always have some small books in my bag, in my backpack, at least one. And I find there's always opportunities to. If you keep the books with you, you'll always find opportunities to distribute Prabhupada's books. So yeah, I wouldn't be so worried about it. Most people don't even notice.
Yeah.
I mean, like the haircut. I mean, this is considered. When I first started shaving my head, that was like unusual. People walking around with bald heads. Now it's like they've got seekers all over the place. It's not unusual these days. So yeah, not something to be so bothered about.
Also with the tilak, Prabhu, what I do is, because I'm still self-conscious in the workplace, so what I do is just the Keshavaya Namaha, I put it with water, and the rest of it with the tilak.
Yeah, so you can do that also. You can do on the face with water. That's also there. And I think, I'm not sure, but I seem to remember years ago hearing that this was something Prabhupada advised the devotees to do also, was put tilak. I might have said to Mukunda Swami to put tilak on with water when you have to go and do business. So you're still identifying yourself as a devotee of Vishnu, and also the metaphysical effect of applying the tilak is there. So you can also do that. Yeah?
Can I just add one point about the cold water bath that
Yeah.
we suggested? Immune system wise, a cold water bath actually is supposed to enhance your immune responses. So I think there's
Yeah.
a scientific angle as well.
Well, I know from my experience as a brahmachari, I used to have cold water baths regularly, and I don't ever recall getting a cold.
Same thing I'm feeling now,
Yeah.
I've been trying for 2
Your
months.
whole system is much more,
Yeah.
your metabolism seems to be more active when you're taking cold water baths, but I don't think I can convince myself to do it anymore.
There's a method that they suggest how to do, the therapeutic side. They said you can start off with warm water. You can start off with warm water bath, because in the mornings when you get into the shower, it's very hard getting cold.
Yeah, but going
So
from
warm
hot to
water,
cold,
and
like
then
another
switch
way.
it for 2 minutes with cold water, and
Yeah.
then
My wife
I
does
tried
that.
that.
My wife does that, and I take my hat off to her. I just can never do that. That's just too much of a shock. But when you're in a situation when you have to, because like what happens at home, we have like one of those instantaneous hot water systems, but the ignition is electric. So if there's no electricity, it doesn't work. And so what I do, and this is a trick I learned years ago from a devotee, is that if the power's out, and you've got to take a bath, you just don't stop taking a bath because there's no electricity. You start with the feet, right? And then you slowly come up the extremities, and then you start with the hands, you come in. And so by the time you get to the chest, it's not as much of a shock. It's still a shock, but not as much. At least to me, it's a shock, So for those of you who want to take cold water baths, all glories to you. A wonderful thing. Not something I can do anymore. Okay, let me see. Yeah, so lots of nice quotes of Prabhupada. So there's a discussion about the mood of worship. Now this is a nice letter that Prabhupada wrote to Gunagrahi, who later became Gunagrahi Maharaj, who is now passed away in Sri Vrindavan Dham and probably gone back to Godhead. Worship of Radha Krishna deities is the ultimate pinnacle of deity worship, and it must be done with the utmost caution and attention to every detail of giving opulent service. I am not recommending more temples to install Radha Krishna deities until I have become more convinced that they can properly manage. At least 5 to 10 persons must be engaged full-time in worshiping, full-time to worship Radha Krishna properly. And for any small temple, especially that, is a detrimental factor to maintain the highest standard in other temple activities. Besides, because there are not enough men. So Prabhupada is basically explaining here that the highest standard of worship. Sometimes people say Shalagram is the highest and things like that. Prabhupada is saying Radha Krishna is the highest. Radha Krishna, the Ishtadevatas of our Sampradaya, they're our worshipful deities. But Prabhupada didn't want it should be, he said sometimes, don't make it a farce, don't make it a joke. It's very serious business to worship Radha Krishna. And if we're able to worship the deities in a way that's in accordance with what Prabhupada is saying here, then we'll get the benefit of that worship. But if we don't do it properly, then we're not going to get the full benefit. So just like you see here, who took darshan this morning? Took darshan of the deities this morning? What colour were the deities wearing?
Green and off-white and...
Yeah, black and white. I thought it was black and white. I don't know whether they got. Is it black and white that set, or is it dark green and white? The set that the deities wearing today. Black and white with beautiful gold trim. Yeah. And it's a very. At least I remember a few years ago for Balaram Punim, we offered a black and white set to Radha Govardhan. And to me, like, the contrasts are quite striking. And that's the thing I noticed this morning. The contrasts were quite striking, and the backdrop, if you look at the backdrop, it's set up in such a way it creates distance. Yeah? And it looks very, very opulent. The way, did you dress this morning?
No, I was at the flower market.
Who dressed for Radha?
I think it was Aditi.
Aditi's done a nice, really nice. Particularly noticed the way she's done the sash and that. Really, really, really nice. But the idea is, as Prabhupada's saying here, is to all attention to detail and opulence, that everything should be very, very opulent in the service of Radha and Krishna. So we see that, we're offering the deity six bulb offerings, 6 scheduled bulb offerings a day. There's also a bulb offering with the morning puja. And the offerings are very opulent. I mean, if you or I were to eat this every day, it wouldn't take long before we'd be very sick, because you just couldn't digest it. And so we see that all attention is being given to ensuring that everything's the utmost opulence. The beautiful dressing, the jewelry, the garlands. I was in Sydney before I came here, and the devotees there have become very, very expert at making garlands that are just the perfect size for the deities. And it seems like, have you seen the garlands that you get from Thailand? It seems like they've learned how the people in Thailand make garlands. They're really, really fancy garlands.
And they're made with the rose petals as well.
Yeah, they roll them up,
They roll them up.
they roll up,
They
so
do it here as well.
so
It's
it's-
a ribbon, and then they do it as well.
yeah, it's just fantastic,
And, yeah.
And they're just all this, like, they're giving attention to every little detail, with the view to satisfying Krishna, with the view to pleasing Krishna. So when you're doing this service for the deities, this is the idea, is to not just think, I can do this quickly so I can get it out in 5 minutes and it's okay, but the idea is to do whatever you can to make the dressing as attractive as possible, to make the bulb offering as opulent as you possibly can, just so it's pleasing to Krishna. Not that we just shortcut and, we find some devotees, they've got busy lives, whatever, they sometimes they shortcut what they're doing to try to get out the door quicker because they've got so many other things happening. But this is not really the best move to have. The best thing is to have this mood of, as Prabhupada is saying here, give every detail of giving opulent service. So whatever you can do to make that service nicer for Krishna. Even things like, you go to Bhaktivedanta Manor, and they've got, like, if you look at the bulb offering paraphernalia they've got, I'm not suggesting you do this here, I'm just talking about, what I've seen in other temples. I'll tell you a few things, actually. So they have these little salt and pepper shakers they've had made up, silver salt and pepper shakers. Right? They've got these spoons they have on the trays, but the spoon's also a straw. Right? It's got like a teaspoon thing, and the handle is like a straw, so that it says like there's licked, chewed, drunk, and sucked. So you can drink with a straw. Then you go to Detroit. Detroit's got some pretty amazing stuff. They've actually got these beds for the deities, and they're quite large. Like the bed's probably about this by about this high. It's made of pure sandalwood. And to make something like, and it still smells like so fragrant. Could you imagine sleeping and just this beautiful fragrance all night long? And to make it now, something like that, the sandalwood now would cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars. But the idea is to create this pleasing environment for Krishna. So he's smelling this beautiful fragrance. Has anyone been to the Summer Palace in Jaipur? Outside of Jaipur, up in the hills. It's very, very beautiful. So one of the Jaipur, the Rajput kings, he had this palace made, and he's got there's 2 bedrooms there, right? Because he had 2 queens. So he's got the sitting room, and on either side there's a bedroom. And you go into the bedroom, right? And there's you look in the roof, and there's all these tiny little mirrors embedded in the roof, right? So they'd have lamp lights there, and then we went in there we went with a tour guide one time, and he closed the door so there's no lights, and he put his torch on. He said, "See, twinkle, twinkle, little star." So you see all this beautiful arrangement in the sky. And then also what they do is they have this because the summers in Jaipur are just like incredibly hot, right? And so they have outside they have these hooks where they used to hang these mats they made from a particular type of reed. And across the top you can see there's a copper tube, and it's got all these small holes. So what they do is they run rose water through that, and it would drip down into the reed mat that was hanging on the window, and then the breeze would come through and blow this beautiful fragrance. Wow. But then also in the courtyard, if you look in the courtyard there, you'll notice there's all these there's like a water feature with all these like canals and stuff, little like cascades and stuff like that. and it used to come through from outside, so they'd fill this up with rose water. And so the rose water would be flowing through all this, so throughout the whole palace there'd be this beautiful fragrance. When they do Janmashtami at the Mumbai temple in Juhu, they put these, you know what an evaporative cooler is?
Yeah.
You've seen those big noisy boxes they have in India, you know, especially in North India on the Vrindavan side. And so what they do is they set up these evaporative, like if you go to the Mumbai temple, you look where the temple room is, and upstairs there's these balconies. So what they do is they set up these evaporative coolers there, and they put fragrant water in there, so they change the fragrance every hour. So that Krishna's getting all these, like, you know, these beautiful fragrances wafting through all day long during Janmashtami. So there's so many things you can do for the pleasure of Krishna. It just really depends on the resources you have available. But the idea here is to do things that are pleasing to Krishna. It's like, it also mentions Prabhupada mentions in his purport to Madhya Lila 24.3.34 that the deity should be offered nicely scented clothes. So what they do in Mayapur is when they're dressing the shalagram is they put a little bit of fragrance on the shalagram, you know, every time before they offer their clothes, they put a little bit of fragrance on the clothes of the deities. Another thing you can potentially do is, I remember when I was a child, is mum used to hang these bags of lavender in the wardrobe, so everything had this nice fragrance. You can do things like that. You know, but the idea is then Krishna puts on the clothes and they've got a nice fragrance to them. There's so many little details you can do like that, which are pleasing to the deity. Same with water. When you offer, you can offer Krishna a cup of water, but you also you put manjaris in them, especially the mature manjaris that have seeds in them, because the seeds give the water a very pleasing fragrance. Yeah? That's like, you know, when you go to the Tulsi house, you get this wonderful fragrance. That's the seeds of the Tulsi, so you put the seeds in the water. They're very, very pleasing. And you make chandan, you can put saffron and camphor in the chandan, depending on the season. You can put all different types of aloes and different fragrances in the chandan to make it more pleasing for Krishna. When you make the bathing water, usually what we show devotees to do is in the bathing water you put flower petals or fragrant flowers. And Prabhupada says that, and he says you bathe the deity in water which has had nicely scented flowers soaking in it for some time. So then the water takes on the fragrance. You can also put chandan in the water, because that also gives it nice fragrance and makes a nice colour. You can put different scents in the water. There's something you can put rose water in the bathing water, tulsi, etc. There's so many nice things you can do to make the experience pleasing for Krishna. And it's interesting in the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam, Krishna is explaining to Uddhava what things that he finds pleasing in deity worship. He says, in Kali Yuga, the two things I find most pleasing in the deity form is bathing and dressing, or ornamenting. So the idea is then, if, you know, like thinking that, okay, Krishna likes being bathed in his deity form in Kali Yuga, so let me make it as nice an experience as I can for his pleasure. And then also he likes dressing, so we dress him very opulently in very nice jewelry and things like that, and very beautiful clothes. Like, you know, this outfit this morning, I thought it was a very, very beautiful outfit. I actually took a photo of it.
I'm glad you liked it.
Huh?
I'm glad you liked it.
Oh, yeah, it's just very, very good standard of clothes here. Yeah.
I have a question that about the deity worshipping is one of the main part of devotion, showing devotion to Krishna. But in this current working environment, so if you go for a trip outside your town, how do you continue that one? And if you don't do bathing or dressing every day, you feel also guilty that I cannot do it.
Yeah.
So how do you solve that?
Well, yeah, this is a topic I was going to touch on next, but I guess we can touch on it now,
Yeah.
is the contrast between home and temple worship. Now, I found many references from Prabhupada where, generally speaking, he didn't encourage devotees, actually he discouraged devotees from having deities at home. And he encouraged them to focus on worshipping the deities in the temple. And he said, you know, if we all work cooperatively this way, the activities of the temple will pull on nicely. Now, you know, fairly fortunate here is quite a lot of Brahmanas. Do you know how many Brahmanas do you have here?
There's over 150.
So you've got over 150 Brahmanas. There's other temples in Australia where they've got similar deities, and they've got 3 Brahmanas. And so in such an environment, for devotees to have deities at home, not a good idea. Because Srila Prabhupada has repeatedly stated, he quotes from Vishnu-Acharya where he says, Sri Vigrahara Dana Nityanana Sringaratan Mandira Marjanado. So Nitya means daily. It can mean regularly, but in this instance, Prabhupada always refers to it as daily. And it says Sringaratan Mandira, so Sringaratan means dressing and all the other things. Mandira and cleansing the temple. So Prabhupada's making the point that the deity should be dressed daily. The deity should be bathed daily. The deity should be fed daily, offered arti daily, woken daily, put to bed daily. All these activities daily. This also applies for home worship. And if you're in the situation where you're thinking to get deities, but you're thinking, I can't do this daily, think again. You don't want deities. You can have a picture altar. With a picture altar, no obligation. When you have three-dimensional deities, you have an obligation of worship. You have to do it daily. Of course, for those who have deities at home now and they can't do it daily, just do your best to maintain steady service. But understand that this is my goal, is to get to the point of daily worship. But I always encourage devotees that if they're living near a temple or they're part of a temple community, just have a picture altar. You need to have an altar at home. Everyone needs to have an altar, but just have a picture altar, because that is not then in conflict with the worship of the temple. Because if you look at the worship you have at home, who benefits from that? The family. The family, basically. And of course, anyone who lives in the area where a Shalagram is worshipped, I can't remember, this thing is 9 miles or something, gets benefit from that. But the benefit's limited. But whereas if you look at the temple here, how many people come and take darshan every day? Hundreds of people come every day. And on festivals, sometimes, maybe up to 10,000 people are coming and taking darshan, maybe more. So there's so much more benefit there. And ISKCON is a preaching mission. It's not a puja mission. You have to keep this firmly in mind. This is a preaching mission. And therefore, if we really want to be Prabhupada Nugas and active followers of Srila Prabhupada, we focus on what his mission is. His mission is to spread Krishna consciousness. So if you're sitting at home ringing bells, how much spreading Krishna consciousness are you going to do? So generally speaking, there are some devotees who have greater capacity. So they have their private worship, but also they're very, very active in preaching. I know Vaisheshika Prabhu, for instance, he does private worship at home, very, very beautiful private worship, but also he's very, very active in his preaching. So some devotees do have greater capacity, but generally speaking, Prabhupada discouraged devotees from having deities at home, encouraged them to have picture altars, and then to get involved in the temple worship. Whether you're a Brahmin or not doesn't matter, because there's so many, just like we see Mataji here is making garlands, the paramalayana cleaning, there's so many things, sorting out jewelry, there's so many things you can do related to deity worship, which don't require you to be a Brahmin. So, very important point to remember that Prabhupada didn't really want devotees to have deities at home, but unfortunately what's happened now is everyone practically has got deities at home. And then some Vaishnavas inform them, you don't have to worship them every day, you can just do it once a week or once in a college. That wasn't Prabhupada's instruction. It's not the instructions of our acharyas. They were very clear, it needs to be done daily. So if you really don't have that time where you can invest an hour or so each day, then you're not really in a suitable situation to have home deities. Yes, ma'am?
I'm just wondering, because sometimes we take on the worship not thinking about the future as well, so that what will happen to the deities if I'm not around anymore to actually do that worship. And I don't think sometimes, because we get in the mail, people will send us deities and shalagrams and put them in the donation box because they no longer can worship them.
You get the greatest jewel in the donation box, eh?
We have had Lord Ramachandra actually come through the donation box.
Yeah, it's a very important point actually to bring up there. Yeah, everyone here's been to Vrindavan?
Yes.
You know where the Goswami Radha Sundar temple is? Down near Loy Bazaar? So you know where the entranceway is to that temple? When you come in, you head towards Loy Bazaar, and there's a road that goes up on the left, and then just you go down about 70 metres, and there's another road, a little laneway on the left there that goes into Radha Sundar. On the other side of that laneway there's a house. And Dina Bandhu took me in there one time, and they've got this beautiful set of Radha Krishna deities that's been worshipped in this family for 480 years. This was about 20 years ago, so it's 500 years they've been worshipping those deities for now. So the thing is, like, you know, those deities were established 500 years ago, but the forefathers of the family saw this as a commitment their family was making to serve Krishna. So their children then took up the worship of the deity, and their children took up the, you know, so it's the worship's gone down through the generations. So this is the kind of worship, especially, you know, within ISKCON, we need to be considering this, that when we establish deities, how will this worship go on? And not that, oh, when I die, I'll just give the deities to the temple and become the temple's problem. Not like that. You find most temples in ISKCON are doing everything they can to keep things going. They don't need any more responsibility of deities to worship. So, you know, if you do establish deities, well, the first thing is I encourage you, don't establish deities at home. But if you do have deities at home, then, you know, try to consider that is, okay, well, how will the worship of these deities go on when I'm gone? Who will take responsibility? Because it's called Nitya Seva. Nitya Seva also means goes on. So you have to be mindful of that. There's another interesting purport I wanted to read. Where is it? 24, 45, 46. This is a very nice pastime from the Bhagavatam, a very nice story. And it's just chanting the song sung by Lord Shiva. And he's talking about the Lord's beauty and how it resembles a dark cloud during the rainy season. And in the purport, it's kind of Prabhupada's purport is not really a little bit connected with it, but quite different. Because the verse is talking about the four-arm form of Krishna and how beautiful the four-arm form of the Lord is. And then Prabhupada in the purport, he starts to talk about, he describes Krishna. He says the Lord wears a peacock feather in his hair, and his bodily complexion is just like a blackish cloud. The word Sundara or Snigdha means very pleasing. Kandapa Koti Kamaniya. Krishna's beauty is so pleasing that not even millions upon millions of cupids can compare to it. So, you know, we're singing Vallabha and we think he's very beautiful, but, you know, we actually don't understand how beautiful Krishna is. You know, Cupid is so beautiful, and Prabhupada is saying here, not even millions upon millions of cupids can compare in beauty with Krishna. The Lord's form as Vishnu is decorated in all opulence. Therefore, Lord Shiva is trying to see that most opulent form of Narayan or Vishnu. So Prabhupada's talking about Krishna, then he's talking about Narayan or Vishnu. Then he goes on to explain, generally the worship of the Lord begins with the worship of Narayana or Vishnu, whereas the worship of Lord Krishna and Radha is most confidential. Lord Narayan is worshipped by the Pancharatric Vidhi or regular principles, whereas Lord Krishna is worshipable by the Bhagavat Vidhi. No one can worship the Lord in the Bhagavat Vidhi without going through the regulations of the Pancharatric Vidhi. Actually, neophyte devotees worship the Lord according to the Pancharatric Vidhi or the regular principles enjoined in the Radha Pancharatra. Radha Krishna cannot be approached by the neophyte devotees. Therefore, temple worship according to the regular principles is offered to Lakshmi Narayan. Although there may be a Radha Krishna Vigraha or form, the worship of the neophyte devotees is acceptable as Lakshmi Narayan worship. Worship according to the Pancharatric Vidhi is called Vidhi Marg, and worship according to the Bhagavad Vidhi principles is called Rag Marg. The principles of Rag Marg are especially meant for devotees who are elevated to the Vrindavan platform. So Prabhupada's really giving a very clear idea on where our consciousness needs to be in terms of the temple worship. Yes, Radha Vallabha is standing there, but because of our limitations, because if you read the stories about Krishna and Vrindavan, his childhood pastime, etc., he's dressing very simply. He's just, you know, he's got a wrap on, and maybe he has a chadar and a peacock feather in his hair. Maybe some pearls in his hair, maybe some beads, but nothing elaborate like what you see here. And so sometimes people are questioning, well, why are you dressing him so, you know, I'm worshipping the Vrindavan mood, I don't want to dress the deities like this. But as Prabhupada is saying here, Vrindavan mood is reserved for those who are very, very elevated, you know, like the six Goswamis. And, you know, to be able to approach Sri Vrindavan Dham means no material desires. It means the material desires are completely gone. No contamination at all. And part of accessing or becoming qualified for this, as Prabhupada points out here, is you cannot approach the Bhagavad Gita without going through the regular principles of the Pancharattrika Vidi. So Vidi means rules. So by following these rules in a regulated fashion, we become purified. And as we remove all our anarthas, then eventually we get to the point of being able to worship Krishna in this mood of the Vrindavan mood. But this is very elevated. And at least in ISKCON, in a public temple, even though we may have very, very elevated souls worshipping the deities, and we do, there are many, very senior, elevated Vaishnavas worshipping the deities in ISKCON, but still you'll see, and we also see with Prabhupada, that they still worship the deity following the Pancharattrika Vidi. Why do you think they do that? Because they're not that advanced?
They're following Syllable.
Huh?
They're following Syllable.
But what about Prabhupada? He wasn't following Prabhupada. But he still followed the rules.
Setting an example.
Exactly, they're setting the example for others to follow. Because what happens is, like, we may be advanced, like, not me, definitely not me, but someone may be an advanced devotee, and may have a particular relationship with Krishna. But then if they go and do that, sort of interact with the deity on the altar, sometimes I've seen devotees hugging deities and things like that. If they do things like that, then what happens is younger devotees get confused. And then what will happen is this sahaja type of mood will creep into the worship. And Prabhupada makes this point elsewhere, that the risk of not following, actually he makes it later on in this purport, I think. Without serving Krishna according to the Vidi Marg regular principles of the Pancharattrika Vidi, unscrupulous persons want to jump immediately to the Raga Marg principles. Such persons are called sahajya. They become sahajyas. There's this cheap approach, trying to enjoy Krishna rather than trying to serve Krishna. So it's really important that we diligently follow the rules and regulations of deity worship, and in that way we'll achieve the goal, we'll achieve the outcome. But if we start to manufacture our own process, or think that we've got a shorter or faster method, very dangerous. You can become completely corrupted and actually forget the goal of the process. So very important to understand what is our mood of worship, what is the approach we have to the deity. It's not uncommon that sometimes you'll have devotees that are worshipping Gauri-Tai, for instance, or Krishna Balaram, and the way they refer to the deities, they refer to them as the boys. I could never imagine approaching the deities and things like that. Or one time a devotee was telling me, it wasn't so long ago actually, that they were cooking the Raj Bhog and said, I'm going to knock Krishna's socks off with his offering. And I was like, how are you going to do that? This is the Supreme Person of Godhead. Radharani cooks for everybody better than that. And there's a really beautiful lecture Prabhupada gave in 1969, I think it is, when he installed the small Radha Krishna deities in Los Angeles called Rukmini Dwarkanath. And in that lecture, Prabhupada's explaining the mood of worship, but it's really personal. The way he's doing it's really personal. He actually gets quite emotional at one point. And he's saying you have to be careful. Don't be puffed up. You're dealing directly with the Supreme Person of Godhead. And then he goes, he's starting to get a bit tearful. And then he goes on to say that, if you have this proper mood of worship, one day that Krishna, he will talk for you. One day that Krishna, he will dance for you. So if you have that proper mood of worship, we become rapidly purified. If we don't follow the Vidi properly, then it slows down the purification process, and it's going to take us much longer. But if we follow the rules, strictly, then we'll find we'll get purified very quickly. And Achincha Mataji and Aniruddha Prabhu have been very diligent over the years, just trying to see that the rules are followed properly here, because they understand this is for our benefit. We all benefit by following the rules properly. But if we don't follow the rules properly, then the worship will become, sort of watered down. The process will become watered down, and then in due course of time, it'll become a very different thing. And we see, like the GBC, they're also very active in this area, not just in deity worship, but in ISKCON in general, because many of them had experience with Prabhupada. They know what Prabhupada wanted in ISKCON. And so they're very diligently doing their best to ensure that the standards that Prabhupada established are maintained. And why is that important? It's because Prabhupada had a direct connection with Krishna. He knew what was the best thing for us in order to become purified and become God conscious. It's not like, as Kali Yuga progresses, we don't have to be so serious, we can change this, we can change that. No, Prabhupada gave us the perfect process for this age. And he presented it in the most efficient way. And if we start to modify and change it down and bring in things from different kind of, cultural or whatever influences we may have when we're growing up, then we run the risk of losing the essence of what Prabhupada gave us. So it's really important to understand these instructions from Prabhupada and apply them in our practice, not just in deity worship, but right across the board in Krishna consciousness. Very, very important. Yes, Marty?
What does the worship, when you say worship in the mood of Lord Narayan, what does that actually look like from an external point of view?
Well, just like you look at the way the deities are dressed today. Krishna doesn't dress like that in Vrindavan.
Yeah.
He dresses very simply.
Yeah.
So that there's lots of jewelry offered. There's beautiful outfits with all the jari work and the all this sort of stuff. Very opulent turban, etc., etc. But you see Krishna in Vrindavan very simple. You look on the altar. There's nice flowers and things. And there's a nice quote where they were doing a festival for the deities someplace. I think it might have been in Seattle. And they sent pictures to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada says, very nice, he said, but I think you should use more flowers. And Krishna is from the Vrindavan atmosphere, he's very fond of flowers. So we see lots of flowers, there's also opulence. The nice vases all the opulent paraphernalia, and marble deity rooms, marble altars, or carved wood altars. The whole thing is very, very opulent. So this is very much a Vaikuntha. Like if you look at the pictures of the Rajput kings and stuff, you can see some of these old history books in England, from India. You can see the opulence, or like you look at Queen Elizabeth, for instance, the opulence she lives in. I remember one year going to we've got the Hermitage in St. Petersburg. Anyone ever been to St. Petersburg? You been to the Hermitage?
Yes.
Pretty amazing place, huh? They've actually got rooms there that are gold leaf, like bigger than a sports gymnasium. Gold leaf. The whole thing's just gold leaf. And it's said that if during the opening hours of the place, if you were to go to every room in that place, visit a room every 3 minutes, change the room, it would take you 2 years to see all the rooms. And they're just so opulent. They've got this, because this is all the Tsars, because St. Petersburg is where the capital of Russia used to be. This is where the Tsars, one of their homes, I think it was their winter palace. And I remember going into one room and they had this urn made of a solid piece of I think it's some sort of granite. And you could probably just about, you could fit it in this room. It's probably about 16 feet across. I still think feet and inches, sorry. About 5 meters wide, about 2 meters across, about 4 meters high. It was carved from just one piece of stone. This beautiful urn with all these nice flutes in it and stuff like that. And like you go to the art gallery, they've got all these Van Goghs and Rembrandts, and they've got the most amazing paintings there. And so it's incredible opulence. But this is the opulence they used to offer to kings. Just some insignificant king. How much opulence should be offered to Krishna? And even all the paraphernalia we use for the Bhog offerings, the plates and the bowls and things like that. If you go to a high-class hotel, for instance, and they'll serve you with the silverware, and it's all pristine condition, shiny like anything. And this is just to serve some materialistic person for the sake of money. How much better should we be offering to Krishna? So just every aspect of it, is opulent. And the servants, because he's the best person, he should have the best servants. And even the way we look after the dresses. Some places you see they actually have drawers. You've been to the farm in Hungary? You checked out their deity department?
Sure do.
It's pretty amazing, huh?
Pretty amazing.
They keep all the dresses in drawers, because what happens if you hang the dresses on hangers, it actually damages the dresses after time, especially on Radharani's dress and stuff, because there's a lot of embroidery work. It pulls apart the waistband. So we see that everything's stored very, very opulently, stored, and respecting that the dresses are actually an expansion of the Lord, and they're not just some mundane cloth.
Yeah, so I'm thinking that a little contrasting things come in mind, that Krishna wants us to go to him empty-handed, like a child of him. And we are talking about the opulence to enlighten our heart to offer this kind of thing, or what is the contrast?
Yeah, I don't think Prabhupada moved was empty-handed. He wanted to come with your hands full of things for Krishna. Yeah. But the idea is, I get where you're coming from, the empty-handed. It's devoid of attachment, not thinking that we're the proprietor, and understanding that everything's for Krishna. It's like Prabhupada would say, like sometimes these mind artists and they say, oh no, don't give me money. Prabhupada would say, give me money. I'll use it for serving Krishna. So that's the thing. It's like we want to come with so much facility for Krishna's pleasure. So whatever we can offer to Krishna, but try to make it the best you can. Even it can be the simplest of things, but make it the best you can. And that's going to vary in capacity. Just like you can see someone who's very wealthy, then they can offer so much to Krishna. But someone who's very poor, they might only be able to offer a cup of water. But at least make sure the cup's clean, make sure the water's clean. It doesn't matter what you have, just offer it to Krishna. That's the main thing. So whatever you have, and Krishna, he says that in the Gita. He says, whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you offer, give away. You do that as something as an offering to me. And this way you become purified from the results of auspicious and inauspicious works. And with your mind fixed on me, this principle of renunciation, you'll be liberated, and thus you'll come to me. And so the idea is whatever you do it for Krishna, but do it the best you can. Always try to improve what you can do.
So what I'm looking at the perspective of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his escorts, the companion.
Yeah.
So they lived so simple life, only one piece of cloth and one stick in their hand, nothing else they had. They used to possess.
Pundaric Vidyanidhi didn't live like that. Pundaric Vidyanidhi did not live like that. Prataparudra didn't live like that.
Pundaric Vidyanidhi, he was one of the characters.
Pundaric Vidyanidhi was a multi-billionaire. He was a very, very wealthy person. He had so much opulence, but he wasn't attached to it. That's the point. Is you can have unlimited wealth, but don't be attached to it. Or you can have you can have a wealthy person who has no attachment, right? And a poor person who's attached. Prabhupada would sometimes use the term the pauper is proud of his penny. And he gave the example one time of how he was traveling on a train. And he saw this poor man, and he was travelling with some burnt pieces of wood, and he was attached to these burnt pieces of wood. So what's better? Is the poor man who's attached, or the wealthy man who's not attached and uses everything for serving Krishna?
Yeah, the wealthy man.
Yeah, because he's understanding that everything is actually for Krishna's service. And this is the real thing, is to understand you can have so much opulence, just like here in this temple, there's so much opulence. But it's all being used for serving Krishna. It's not being used for serving individuals. They can go to the ashram, the brahmacharis live quite simply. Because they're using whatever they have to serve Krishna. Like there's this beautiful room here. But it's here for serving, the Lord's pure devotee. So you can have so much opulence, but just, the thing is, Prabhupada would say, the idea is to just change, the reason you're doing things. And sometimes we give the analogy, everything in this material world is just a big zero. You can have big buildings and, skyscraper buildings and cars and all this type of stuff. And if it's not connected to Krishna, it's nothing, it's zero. But if you connect it all with Krishna, you put a 1 in front of all these zeros, it becomes something substantial. So by connecting with things with Krishna, then it becomes significant, it becomes something of value. But without Krishna, there's no value to us whatsoever. And it's actually worse than being of no value, it's actually detrimental because it causes us to be attached. But by using it for Krishna, all these things that cause us to become attached, just like you have a nice car, right? My very beautiful car, and you shine it every day, and etc., etc. You become very attached to that car. This car is the cause of bondage. This car will be the cause of you taking birth again. But if you have the same car and you use it for Krishna, you maybe take Jagannath to Rath-Yatra or something like that. Just like you see in London when they take the deities Jagannath from the London temple. There's a devotee there who has a hire company. They bring 4 Rolls Royces actually, one for Prabhupada too. Really, really nice cars. I've actually been the servant, for the deities. Sometimes you sit on the floor at the feet of the deities in the car. They're very, very opulent cars, but they're being used properly. They're being used for the service of Krishna. And at one time, Prabhupada, it was actually when Prabhupada came here to Melbourne, they picked him up from the airport in a Rolls Royce, and so someone was criticising that. And there's the picture of Prabhupada sitting in that Rolls Royce. So someone when he was doing the class was questioning that. And Prabhupada said, for the spiritual master, the Rolls Royce should be made of solid gold. So, but he wasn't affected by it. It wasn't like he was thinking, I'm an important person, here I am driving the Rolls Royce. He was understanding that everything should be used in Krishna's service. And then when it's used in Krishna's service, it's actually liberating. But it's used for us, it's contaminating. We become bound up. So a very important point to understand. You can have unlimited opulence, just use it for Krishna. Okay, anything else? I'm not sure if I had anything else. Standard is a word. Okay, let me have one last purport I want to read from. If you just bear with me for a minute. I think I referenced this a little bit before. This is from the 8th canto of the 8th chapter of the 4th canto, text 54. See, everything's there in Prabhupada's books. We don't need to imagine anything. We don't need to make anything up. It's all there in Prabhupada's books. I touched on this one before. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. This is the 12-syllable mantra for worshipping Lord Krishna. One should install the physical forms of the Lord, and with the chanting of the mantra, one should offer flowers and fruits and other varieties of foodstuff, exactly according to the rules and regulations prescribed by authorities. So, many important points Prabhupada is making here. We offer according to the rules and regulations given by the authorities. We don't make up our own system. We follow the system that comes from the authorities. And therefore, because it's authorized, it's effective. But this should be done in consideration, very important thing, this is Narayana Muni speaking actually, but this should be done in consideration of place, time, and attendant conveniences and inconveniences. So just like here, you'll see, there's 150 Brahmins. So it means, I know like in Los Angeles, for instance, they have an abundance of Brahmins there. So what they do, because there's so many people pushing to engage in deity worship, same at Bhaktivedanta, so many people pushing to engage in deity worship, you're lucky if you get on the roster once a month. There's just so many devotees who want to do deity worship. What they do in Los Angeles, and I thought it was really nice, and really good standard of worship they have there, is when they're dressing the deities in the morning, one devotee undresses the deities, another devotee dresses the deities. So it means like while the deities being undressed, Pujari B can be pulling out the jewelry and the dresses and stuff like that. And then so when the other devotee is dressing, then the other devotee is putting away the paraphernalia. So I mean, there's so many ways you can engage many devotees. But then if you go, there's a temple not far from here in New South Wales, where they only have really one main pujari. And so he does everything. He dresses the deities, he cooks the deities, he cleans the paraphernalia, he does everything. And so it's a little bit challenging for him, and I'm always on the lookout for anyone who wants to go live in the country and do deity worship. It's the same with in some of the temples in Europe, like in New Mayapur, very difficult situation there, has been for many years. But once upon a time, that was like one of the most thriving communities in ISKCON. I think there was 700 devotees living there, some huge amount of devotees living there. It was a big community. But with the shifting tide of fortune, things are not the same anymore. But Prabhupada's making quite a few good points here. So when we offer food stuff to the deity, it's just like you might, especially when you're doing worship of the small deities, you offer archman to the deity. So you eat archamaniyam, and then you chant the mula of the deity. So you're offering with mantra. This is the process or the system that's used. And then Prabhupada goes in his purport. It's quite a few interesting things he says here. One thing he says that those who are not Brahmins, some people say that those who are not Brahmins cannot chant the pranava mantra. He says, but Dhruva Maharaj wasn't a Brahmin, he was a Kshatriya. And Narad Muni is telling him he to chant the pranava. And he's saying here is tacit proof that if a person accepts the Vaishnava mantra or Vaishnava way of worshipping the deity, he is allowed to chant the pranava mantra. In Bhagavad Gita, the Lord personally accepts that anyone, even one of the low species, can be elevated to the highest position and go back home, back to Godhead, simply if he worships properly. And then, this is, I encourage you to read this purport if you have time, 4.854. The method of worship, chanting the mantra and preparing the forms of the Lord is not stereotyped, nor is it exactly the same everywhere. It is specifically mentioned in this verse that one should take consideration of time, place, and available conveniences. Our Krishna consciousness movement is going on throughout the entire world, and we also install deities in different centres. Sometimes our Indian friends, puffed up with concocted notions, criticise, this has not been done, that has not been done. But they forget this instruction of Narad Muni to one of the greatest Vaishnavas, Dhruva Maharaj. One has to consider the particular time, country, and conveniences. What is convenient in India may not be convenient in the Western countries. Those who are not actually in the line of acharyas, or who personally have no knowledge of how to act in the role of an acharya, unnecessarily criticize the activities of the ISKCON movement in countries outside of India. The fact is that such critics cannot do anything personally to spread Krishna consciousness. If someone does go and preach, taking all risks and allowing all considerations for time and place, it might be that there are changes in the manner of worship, but that is not at all faulty according to Shastra. And so Prabhupada goes on with that. But Prabhupada's making a really clear point here that just because you see things being done differently in different places, it doesn't mean that it's wrong. It doesn't mean that it's faulty. You have to look at the time, the place, and the available conveniences and inconvenience. But what you can do in a temple like this, when you have 150 brahmanas who are eager to do deity worship. I mean, I can think of many temples. Like you look at Durban in South Africa, they have more than 250 brahmanas willing to do deity worship, eager to do deity worship. Chowpatty, they have so many devotees, so many devotees doing deity worship there. Mumbai, they have many, Bhaktivedanta Manor, Soho Street in London. They have hundreds of devotees just eager to do deity worship. But then you look at some temples, they don't even have enough devotees just to do the basic things, let alone do elaborate things. So naturally it's going to happen that the standards of worship are going to be different. And that shouldn't be a source of criticism or trying to change things in the temple, because you have to understand how things are happening and why they're happening the way they are. So, and even like if you learn to do things a particular way in one place and you go to another place, not that you should try and, or you come to Mayapur, we teach you in Mayapur, or I do a course here, I teach you how to do deity worship in a particular way. It doesn't then mean you go and harass the, Chintarupa and that and say, but the Sri Kavaca taught us like this, therefore we should do this, because that's just going to create disturbance. The point is like, you have to look at time, place, available convenience and inconvenience, and it's going to be done differently in different places. That's just the fact of it. And even in India, you go to different temples in India, you'll see, you look in Vrindavan, things are done differently from one temple to the next. Or you go North India, South India, very, very different. So there's so many variations in the worship, and that's okay. That's okay, because it's done for the pleasure of Krishna. Like you go to, what's that temple? In Pandapur? Who's been there? Vitala. You can go and put your head on the feet of the deity.
They take you right down.
How many if you pay enough money?
No, we were right there and there was no one.
Oh, no one there. When we were there was a few people that you had to pay enough money for.
There was so
I got to go and put my head on his feet.
yes.
But you can imagine trying to do that in Tirumala? No way. So we see different temples. And also you go to Nathdwara and see Nathaji. The worship they have there is very, very stylized and very, very unique. And a lot of it's based on, this is what they call this Bhav Seva. The Seva is done according to the Bhav of the Sevites, and over the years it's developed in many, many different ways. especially from different pastimes and things like that. So there's going to be like so much variation in the worship, but it shouldn't be that we point out, I mean, in my service I have to point it out, but it's not like I'm trying to find fault. I'm just trying to help them understand how to do the worship. But as a general thing, we try to just accept it. Okay, it's different. That's all. Not better or worse. It's just different. So that's an important point. Any comments, questions? Yes, we will.
Yeah. So as you're saying that through worshipping you can talk to Krishna. So how you can achieve to that kind of enlightened state?
How what?
How we can achieve to that enlightened state that we can talk to Krishna directly?
To the process of bhakti. Just applying yourself to the process of bhakti. It may happen quickly, it may not. It may take lifetimes before you get to that point. It just depends on the individual and how they surrender. And also it depends on Krishna whether he wants to talk to you or not. Because Krishna is also a person. He's not like a robot, or like a machine. You plug in your money and something pops out the bottom. Not like that at all. Krishna's a person. And even like there's a beautiful pastime in the Bhagavatam where Narad Muni, I think it's chapters 5 and 6 in the first canto. Narad Muni, after performing austerities and meditating, then the Lord appeared to him and spoke to him. And he said, "But you will not see me for many lifetimes to come." And he was trying, because the experience was, he was so ecstatic from this experience of Krishna being there that he was just hankering to have this experience again. But he was trying for many lifetimes. It wasn't until lifetimes later that he actually got to have that same experience again. You can't force Krishna. You may be able to force things in the material world, but you can't force Krishna. So it's dependent on your advancement, your purity, and Krishna's mercy. And there was a story here actually where Sukadev, right? Where Jagannath appeared to him in a dream and gave him some instruction that he wanted a particular thing. But the Pujari who was serving Jagannath was wondering, well, why didn't I get that dream? So the Lord has his independent will, and he will do things the way he wants to do things. We can't force him.
When you mentioned about the Achman cup, do we imbibe, invoke, there's the mantra like Gange Yamune.
Yeah, you can do that. You can do that. Then the idea, there's different ways of doing it, but essentially what you do is you have to have clean water, clean Achman cup, clean water, and the idea is you pray for the holy rivers, Ganga, Jamuna, and Godavari, and Saraswati, Sindhu, to Krishna, to appear in that water. You do it, several times throughout the day.
We do that mantra that we fill up the bucket with the water for the baby and we do
Yeah.
and then we chant those mantras.
In technical terms, it's called Samanya Argastapana. It means making argue, Samanya means general, argu means water, purified water. Stapana means to establish. So you can do that. And it's a lot of these things are really nice because they just, some devotees like to do mudras and stuff like that. And a lot of these things just help the worshipper to feel that things are more pure by connecting with Krishna in that way. So these things can be helpful to the consciousness. Not entirely necessary. There is one purport, I think it's in the same chapter, where Prabhupada refers to the word Shilila. He says Shilila means you can use any water. So some devotees will say, oh, that means you don't take the Ganges, and that you can make it into Ganges water. That may also apply. But some places you'll find they just use regular water, they don't make it into Ganges water. So the thing is it's kind of hard, we're working on redoing this book, and it's kind of hard because looking at what's going on in ISKCON around the globe, there's many different standards of worship. It's not that one's right and one's wrong. Mostly you find these standards of worship are perfectly acceptable. So how to present the practice of deity worship in a way that's generic enough so that devotees get the point, but also not sending the message that what you're doing is wrong. You just have to be very, very careful. And then also, one of the things we're also considering is that these books are going to be translated into other languages. So we have to make it really clear, so when they're translated, they get the message. So it's challenging. Sometimes, like today, we usually work 3 days a week on it. So today I managed to get 3 headings in place. And a few slokas. So it's kind of, and it's like, and one of the things also is often you find with deity worship that it tends to attract, not only, but it does tend to attract people who are quite new in Krishna consciousness. And oftentimes you find people who really take shelter of regularity and things just being the same every day, and they tend to take shelter of deity worship. But the downside of that is oftentimes they're too inflexible. And so, there needs to be a degree of flexibility there, but at the same point, maintaining consistent standards, which can be a bit of a juggling act. So like oftentimes when if temples ask me to get involved in setting up standards, I'll generally encourage them to establish standards that give scope for individual expression. Not meaning that the devotees are going to dress Lord Balaram as a gopi or something like that. That's not individual expression. That's speculation. But things like some devotees are more attracted to chanting mantras, for instance. So you don't make the procedure so complicated they can just get it done in time. You make the procedure simple enough so that if devotees want to do more mantras, they can do it. If they want to offer bholga, they can do it. Like in Mayapur, the only deity in the morning, during the puja that's required to have a bholga offering is Janardhan, the shalagram. But if the other devotees want to offer bholga, say for those who are dressing, like you have one devotee is dressing Prabhupada in Gauranga Mahaprabhu, another devotee is dressing small Radha Madhava, and another devotee is doing Giriraj, another devotee is doing shalagram. Sometimes shalagram pujari and Giriraj pujari is the same. But so the standard Jananivas is established is with the shalagram shila they do the 16 items of worship. Actually they do more, but it's 16 main items, Asana, Swaga, Padyaya, etc. But with the other deities, basically it's just offer, reception, bathing and dressing. But Jananivas Prabhu has left the scope and the facility there that if the pujari wants to do more, if they want to offer bholga to the deity and they want to do all the items of worship, Gandha, Pushpa, Dhupa, Deepa, etc., that's there. The paraphernalia is there, the resources are there, but also they can just make up a fruit plate and get some sweets. So, like some devotees have it, and some devotees are, more inclined to dressing the deities really elaborately. So it needs to be scoped to do that sort of stuff. Like you go to some temples, I've seen, and you have to dress the deities the same way every day. Which to me, like as a person who has dressed deities quite a lot, I would find that quite restrictive and quite inhibiting, and I wouldn't feel inspired to dress in such, like Radharani's plait has to be exactly the same. The deities' jewels have to be exactly the same. It's like, I think there needs to be room for the expression of the individuality within certain parameters. And different temples are going to establish different things. That's just the fact of it. And also, they find from their experience over the years that certain types of things, behaviours you might call them, start to manifest. And so this may not be thought of being as so conducive to what's happening in that temple, the preaching or whatever. So they'll establish a rule to stop that from happening. For instance, washing the deity's plates. As far as I can figure out, this is not a rule in Shastra, but I'm guessing that what temples have discovered is if they don't have the rule of washing the plates before we honour prasad, the plate might not get washed until the next offering. It's just like dealing with human nature. So it's not actually a rule that the plate has to be washed, because even there's a letter Prabhupada wrote to Karandar, I think it was, where they were doing these programs in California. I can't remember, I think it might have been San Francisco. And Prabhupada said they could distribute the prasad while the plate was still on the altar. Now, you know, if you were to do, you have to be careful, because I know one temple where like, you know, there wasn't a lot of restriction around that sort of stuff, and devotees were coming into the deity department and helping themselves to what was on the plate. But the problem was they were actually taking it before it was offered. You know, so therefore you see that certain rules are introduced to stop these things from happening, because you've got to deal with human nature also. Yes, ma'am.
Is it, I was told that in the Bhagavatam somewhere it says that the Japa isn't complete until the utensils are washed.
You know, I'm not aware of that being, you know, I mean, part of the service is, you know, I guess that is kind of indicating that this is also part of the service, is to clean the paraphernalia, because we understand the paraphernalia to be an expansion of Lord Balaram. And you know, Sanatana Swami talks about, you know, how to clean and stuff like that. But in terms of the point I was making more is like, as far as I know, there's not a rule that you have to wash the plates before distributing prasad. But I can see that these things have come about as a managerial necessity, because otherwise people will wind up, you know, eating the prasad, not washing the plates, or as one temple experienced, taking the bhoga from the plate before it's even offered, thinking they've got Mahaprasad. So, you know, sometimes these things happen just out of necessity. So, yeah. But I do think, you know, just to be mindful that not to have so many rules that the individual expression gets stifled.
But it's okay then though to have a standard of dress, because I've written up a service description on dressing the deities, but it still leaves that room for individuality, but what the deity should be wearing, so that the morning tie doesn't get dressed without a top.
Yeah.
They have their tops on, or that the chatters need to be symmetrical, and just different things on how.
Yeah, no, these things are perfectly acceptable. Because one thing also to consider is that, like, you know, say for instance, you know, in a temple like this, for instance, where Radha Ballabha are dressed, you know, in similar style most days, you know? And then if you get someone who comes in and dresses like completely differently, then it's going to disturb the minds of the devotees. They're going to think, what's going on here? I mean, what's happened to Radha Ballabha? You know, so there's that element of it. But also, like, you know, sort of consistent standards of worship to maintain consistent service also, that the deities are getting, you know, there's that story about Founder-Acharya, you know, with the suck, and how, you know, he was getting offered this suck every day, and he started to become attached to the suck, and then one day the suck didn't come, and he's like, well, where is it? What's happened to my suck? You know, so Krishna also gets, you know, a particular standard of worship is developed over the years. He likes that. He likes consistency. So consistency is a very important part of the worship. And especially for the sadhaka, if the sadhaka is engaged consistently in serving the deity, then great benefit, great spiritual advancement is made from that consistency in service. So there's no problem with having, you know, guidelines for devotees to follow. I think personally think it's essential. Otherwise, it's like, you know, just like with the bhog offering menu, you know, it's like, if you just say like 5 preparations on the bhog offering menu, then you know, like, who knows what you're going to wind up with. But, you know, so you give clearer guidelines of, okay, Raj bhog means sabji, rice, dal, chapati, you know, like 4 sabjis, you know, etc. Means chutney, it means this, means that. Then Krishna's going to get consistent. Okay, maybe one day he has tomato chutney, next day it's tamarind chutney, next day it's apple, whatever. That's variety, but, you know, at least there should be a consistent standard there. So it's important to do that.
So it's kind of not like doing it in a robotic fashion.
Yeah, because the whole idea is to manifest bhakti, and bhakti is a personal expression. It's not like, you know, your bhakti is going to manifest in one way, and another person's bhakti is going to manifest differently. Yeah, so not to make it robotic. You know, like Radharani's, you know, her ponytail has to be exactly like this with this amount of curves. You've got to have this jewel here, this jewel here, this jewel. You know, that's a little bit too controlling.
Some temples do have it like that.
Huh?
Some temples would have it like that.
Yes, they do. Very restrictive. The deities look the same every day. But, you know, and then I'm not saying it is robotic, but it causes me to question whether the practice that, you know, what they're offering is somewhat robotic. I mean, what's my capacity to say, but it just seems like, there's not a lot of scope for the individual manifestation of bhakti in that environment. So, and I think also, not to make it too difficult for devotees, because sometimes, especially in the 80s, there was this trend to have all these really, really strict rules and regulations. But then, a lot of devotees just can't come up to that standard. Or some temples, if the devotees didn't do things a particular way, they were banned from doing deity worship for 6 months. Huh?
It happened here and
Yeah, it's not over minor
I'm not
things.
saying it was good or bad, but it happened, yeah.
Yeah, but the thing is, the point is that I'm trying to make there is, I've seen that people are banned from doing deity worship over really little things. Like the way they hang the chadar on the deity, they put the chadar, or fan right around his dress too much. Okay, you're not dressing the deities anymore. It's excessive. I mean, if someone's doing strange things, then you can see, that we had one devotee up in New Govardhan who actually knocked Krishna off the table, onto the small deity onto the floor, and I regularly sort of pointed out to her that this devotee needed to sort of slow down and just be a little bit more mindful in the deity room. Didn't take any notice, and was just storming it out of the altar and knocked Krishna off the table one day, saying, sorry, I just can't let you dress the deities anymore, I can't let you on the altar anymore. So, I mean, things like that, some people just aren't suited to doing deity worship. But then, if it's just small things, usually it comes from education, and just training people how to do things properly. Yeah? Something else? Okay, so thank you all very much. It's always a wonderful experience to come back to Melbourne. It's like coming home for me. Always like it here. It's a place I joined. It's always had a special place. I was telling devotees how we used to sit in here every Sunday with a Sankirtan meeting, and then we were allowed to sit on the carpet. Yeah. Oh, when Balaram was there, we were able to sit on the carpet sometimes. But they used to have these bolts, what are they called?
Baskets.
The bolt, no, not bolts, what are they called? Balustrade thing.
Balustrades
Around it, yeah.
Yeah,
So
so
you have to
if
walk
you were
around.
to walk on the carpet for chanting,
You're allowed to walk on it. Yeah. A lot of
that
good,
was to preserve, I think.
yes, a lot of good memories here. A lot of good memories. Okay, thank you so much for the Prabhupada ki.
Jai.
Swami Bhaktivedanta ki.
Jai.
Jai Nitai Go Premanandi.
And check.
Yeah. Check.